Aloha. Welcome to Ably Seminars sessions. Today, we're going to talk about a very important topic on federal fair housing law and the state fair housing law. There are two different laws on the same topic. I'm going to talk about the federal fair housing law and add a little more to the state fair housing law. And we'll also talk about what they call ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is an interesting topic that makes sure that people are treated fairly and that there's no discrimination. So the federal fair housing law started with what they call Civil Rights Act of 1866. You remember that we had the Civil War and the blacks were emancipated. So now the government came out and said, with the 1866 Civil Rights Law, that there shall be no discrimination based on race in all personal and real estate transactions. But did that law really work well? No, I don't think so, because there was still discrimination. And there was hatred among the whites and the blacks. So the Civil Rights Act of 1866 tried to start this trend, but it really didn't work well. Then, Fair Housing Act of 1968, 1978 prohibited discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, national origin for sale of vacant and rental properties. Then, in 1974, there's an amendment prohibiting gender discrimination. In 1988, there was a fair housing law against discriminating on familial status and handicap protection. So this took over 100 years to have the American government have all these protected classes so that they be protected from discrimination. So under the federal law, there's 7 protected classes. Under the state law, there's 12 protected classes. So the state of Hawaii has 5 more protected classes than the federal law, which I think is great because there's more protected classes under the state law than the federal law. Under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, the law passed in 1992 and was effective from January 1st of 1993. And some people have hailed this law as the great equalizer, so that people that are disabled mentally or physically would not be discriminated against. And this had to do with physical accessibility of what they call public accommodations, and also to service people that may be disabled mentally or physically. So if you notice that since 1993, almost all the commercial properties had to have a ramp for the wheelchair. They had to have handicap parking. And then the elevators, they had to have their buttons lowered so someone sitting in a wheelchair could access the buttons. Lots and lots of things had to change. If you look on some areas, they even have access for wheelchair accessibility on the main roads. And they have to have sidewalks and curbs that will allow a handicapped person that when they're crossing the street will have access from one street corner to another and not a curb with a bump so that they can't access that other part of the street. So lots of things happen to help people with disability and handicaps. Now, even with serving people that might be blind or deaf, you have to be able to provide the services to the clients without charging them. So it has to be at the cost of the realtor to provide those services, like a person that might do signing for the deaf or to have Braille for the blind. So all these laws help to try and equalize the services that were provided and accesses that are provided to disabled people. When you have a brand new building, you have to have so many units that are accessible to the disabled. And you usually have what they call a handicap accessibility units. Not the whole building does not have to have all that, just so many units per so many units in a building. So these laws would enable people to have access in services and accessibility. And it really, I think, is a wonderful law. An example of one of the fair housing laws is that in an area called Paiko Lagoon on Oahu, there was a covenant that said that anybody that bought in Paiko Lagoon had to be Caucasian, and no one else could buy the home there. That is clearly a violation of the 1866 Civil Rights Act. But people were discriminating and only sold to Caucasians. I did not see that deed restriction, but my students have told me about it. They also said that you can have non-Caucasians come to the property to do the yard work, to clean the house, and do the cooking. But they have to leave after they finish the work. That's discrimination, but it's in the code or in the covenants. That is clearly illegal. And so there are things like that, even in Hawaii, where people were discriminating against people. And fortunately, those covenants no longer are valid. So hopefully you learned something new about discrimination, fair housing, and that we need to support the laws that will provide equal services and opportunities to our friends and fellow citizens that may be disabled mentally or physically. Thank you.